Hey, it's Mr. Shrum, and welcome back to the Process of Evolution tutorial. And we just left off right before the evidence for evolution section. And so we're going to talk about evidence. So what evidence is there for this theory of evolution, scientific theory? And the evidence for evolution, we actually have a picture here. A species' genome or its genetic material is always evolving. New genetic mutations or genetic combinations can yield new traits in a species. These traits eventually lead to the development of new species, and those are from existing species. So over time, these small mutations and genetic combinations can result in a new species. And how do we determine that an ape and a human evolved from a common ancestor? Well, scientists have multiple forms of evidence supporting the idea that organisms evolve. Fossils are one form of evidence. We can also find evidence of evolution by comparing the anatomy, developmental processes, and genomes of life forms. So let's see how this evidence helps explain the process of evolution. All right, so we have some skull examples on the right here, and the process of evolution. We call evolution a scientific theory based on facts that explain how a species changes over time. Think of a scientific theory as a useful way to explain how we see the world, and it's useful to us in that way. The organisms that exist now developed from ancestors through evolution. The process of evolution is not a straight line. Instead, it branches like a tree. A species doesn't simply turn itself into a new species. New species evolve from existing species. And the original ancestors may continue to survive and exist alongside them, or they may eventually become extinct. They don't just cease to exist when a new species evolves from them. Organisms with beneficial traits reproduce successfully and pass on these traits to their offspring. So the ones who are better adaptable, they're more adaptable to the environment, they're more likely to reproduce and survive. Over a span of billions of years, new species with varying characteristics formed on Earth because of natural selection and mutations in the genomes. As a result, Earth has thousands of species of birds and other animals today. Evolution is random, but it can happen because of genetic variation in species. Random genetic mutations and genetic combinations give rise to changes in the genetic composition of a species. What that means is these random changes in your genes can result in different combinations of genes. And these changes introduce new traits leading to variations, some of them useful, some of them not so useful. And the stability of a trait depends on the environment in which the organism lives. If the trait is beneficial, if it helps them survive, then it prevails in the species. Changing the environment leads to traits becoming more or less beneficial, and the inheritance of these traits changes accordingly. One method that scientists use to study the evolution of organisms is phylogenetic charts, which show the relationship between species. And like a tree diagram, this chart shows the branching of new species from existing species. And if you look at this moth here, this is known as a peppered moth. And this pattern on its wings is useful in this environment because it blends in pretty well with this tree. So this helps it camouflage itself, and it helps predators um, it helps it hide from potential predators. So here is an example of this chart, phylogenetic chart. Here, let's read aloud, just in case. Phylogenetic chart. So a phylogenetic chart looks something like this, where it starts out here, branches off, continues branching off and off. So we have these points right here, labeled here, that would be known as a common ancestor. So A, B, C, and B and C have a common ancestor here. And then these guys also have a common ancestor with A. So, and this paragraph explains it a little more. The root of the tree stands for the ancestral species from which the rest of the species evolved. This orange square box represents a common ancestor for all A, B, and C species. The tips of the branches emerging from the root represent the descendants of the ancestor. So if you've ever seen a family tree, this is like that, but for species, whereas a family tree is based around individuals in a family. This is based around species, families of species. And the tips of the branches emerging, the tip of the left branch from the orange box, so this one right here, is species A. And the right branch is the common ancestor for species B and C. The lines represent a lineage, so line, lineage. The branches and nodes in the chart represent speciation of the organism. And that word, speciation, is a lineage splitting event that produces two or more separate species from the common ancestor. The branches from the green box indicate the evolution of new species B and C. The more branches the two organisms share, the closer they are related. So species B and C share two branches compared to species A and B. Therefore, B is more related to C than B is related to A. So A is further away from B, B and C are closer together. Makes sense. The bottom portion of the chart shows the evolutionary relationships between insects and indicates the presence of a common ancestor for the species. So we have beetles, wasps, bee, ants, butterflies, moths, and flies. So butterflies, moths, and flies have a common ancestor. They also have a common ancestor with wasps, bees, and ants, and they also have a common ancestor with beetles, but further away. All right, so this phylogenetic chart describes how modern day elephants, which we have Asian elephants and African elephants, evolved from extinct species. So based on the chart, are Asian elephants more closely related to mammoths or mammuthus, is their scientific name, or mammoths or mastodons? Are mammoth mastodons the same species as paleomastodons? Explain your reasoning for both questions. So we're going to look at the branches and how they relate to one another and see if we can answer those questions. So today, this gray box represents today, where we have Asian elephants and African elephants, and then we see their ancestors and their lineage here. So here's mammoth, here's mastodon. They are more closely related to the mammoth. Are mammoth mastodons the same species as paleomastodons? Well, no. So here we go. Asian elephants are more closely related to mammoths because they share more nodes and branches on the phylogenetic chart. This relationship suggests a closer evolutionary ancestry. Mastodons and paleomastodons are not the same species because they branch out here. So here's paleomastodon, and then we have a branch, and then we have a branch break again, and then there's the mastodon. And Asian elephants, see how closely related they are to mammoths. So they're very close. Mastodons and paleomastodons are not the same species. There are branches from paleomastodon and mammoths that suggest speciation occurred. Speciation, remember that means new species developed, more descendants occur. Mammoths also have common evolutionary ancestors that mastodons do not have. So that they're talking about this section right here. Okay, did that make sense? You can go back and look at that chart again to practice finding lineage, but I think it's mostly straightforward if you know what you're looking for. Comparative anatomy. We can also study evolution by comparing the anatomical structures of living organisms. The study of the similarities and differences between the physical structures of organisms is called comparative anatomy. So if we consider a cat, like a house cat, and a tiger, they have striking similarities in their body structure and features, yet they are different from each other in many aspects. Similar features easily point to the fact that these animals share a common ancestor. These similarities and differences can be used to determine the relationship between these two species. Scientists also compare the anatomy of the living organisms with the fossils of extinct species. Comparative anatomy involves the study of homologous, analogous, and vestigial structures. So let's discuss these structures in detail. And I'm going to cut us off right there, but we will talk about this later. All right, bye-bye.